I am tired of these goobers lying. Okay, so I've been thinking about how to best approach this problem because it feels like the UC PIQ video series seems to always harken back to people lying on the application process. But, like, dude, some of y'all are so down bad, so down cataclysmic for top colleges that you're willing to lie on your UC PIQ 7 through your teeth. Like, okay, okay, look, I'll explain a little bit more in a sec, but just a little bit of background information so we're all caught up. Okay, so UCPIQ 7, the prompt in question goes something like this. All right, what have you done to make your school or community a better place? Now, look, all right, I've been doing college admissions consulting for a while now. Specifically, I help students get into T20s like Harvard, Dartmouth, Cornell, UMich, NYU, UPenn, Berkeley, all that stuff, right? And like, look, I don't know if it's just me, but everyone answering UCPIQ 7 is taking the whole exaggerating impact thing way too seriously. Like, am I supposed to just like believe your anti-bullying campaign from school just somehow made everyone super nice and kind to each other? Like, like no, dude, right? Like, we all know we'd sell our souls, our freaking bloodline, right? Like, for a modicum of that sweet investment banking syrup, right? Okay, okay, I gotta stop harping on these business meters, man, because like I'm like bullying to them too hard on this series. But I'm sorry, guys, all right, but you get the point, right? Like, to clarify, it's all right to talk about things like a food drive, right? Or like maybe as another example, right? Like that time that your nonprofit raised funds for a marathon to help people back in your hometown in India, right? Or like just as another one, right? Stuff like joining an environmental activism club that plants trees, right? Like like whatever it is. Don't just try to trick your admissions officers into thinking the impact is like bigger than it actually is, right? Like, they're not born yesterday. Seriously, right? They have more experience in this stuff, right? Whatever you thought of, they likely know about it, right? You're gonna get caught red-handed, okay? Okay, all right, all right. Got it? Great. Now, with that said, I actually want to be transparent here and say that UC PIQ 7 is actually not really that bad of a PIQ to answer. Um, in fact, I actually think this one, while it can be hard to prove, especially like at your age, how you've actually contributed to a community, there's actually enough flexibility here that you can really scale down onto the micro level. Uh, and I'm actually going to be covering this in one of the first points out of three, right? There's going to be three things that I think if you do these, you can actually really make your essay stand out way more than the rest of the other people who are writing PIQ 7, okay? So, yeah, let's just get right to it for number one, all right? Minimize your chosen community, okay? So, we actually kind of covered this point in PIQ 6, but roughly speaking, it's nearly impossible for someone at your age to make a meaningful impact on a macro level community. All right. Once you start trying to say your influence impacts, like, let's just say, for example, like the entire Chinese community, which I've seen people say that before, right? You practically shoot yourself in the foot by giving yourself way too big of a task to chew, right? You'll have to prove an impossibility, which is claiming your work had a positive impact on a very wide scale of people with your high school experience, right? Which, it could technically be true, right? It's often going to require you to stretch your words beyond belief, at least for the majority of the time, right? Look, I'll give you an example, okay? So, let's just say you're part of a club in the SoCal region that advocates for anti-racism, right? You're pro-Asian rights, right? You can make the argument that you're supporting the Asian community, but that's a very, very large community. It might be technically true, but the larger scale of people, the more thinned out your influence is going to be. If, however, you add qualifiers to the people you're supporting, you end up having a much more tangible reach. So I'm just going to give an example of this, all right? Let's say, for instance, your city is filled with Asian American people that insist on remaining politically neutral despite the blatant violence against them, right? Advocating for these people to vote and participate in demonstrations is a great way to show that your work has a tangible impact. If you changed it from Asian community to something with a smaller reach, like the Asian community in my city that's often politically neutral, then you've got a far more tangible reach, right? The choice of topic is going to be way better than having to chew far more than you can. Like, I helped Asians in general, right? Like, dude, so long as you keep your scope of community small, you'll be able to make your impact far more meaningful in comparison, right? Okay, so we're gonna go on to number two now because that was like pretty straightforward. All right, so let imagery serve a purpose when it comes to explaining how you serve the community. Long story short, make sure your imagery actually helps admissions officers understand how you help serve your community. The main problem that most people have with PIQ 7 is being too gratuitous with their imagery and things that don't actually serve them. 200 words about how you felt walking through the door probably isn't going to help your admissions officers a whole lot. You'll just end up obfuscating the main plot, which is bad if your AOs need to focus on the main idea, right? Reserve the strong imagery for the actual impact that you had, right? You can talk about things like how planting trees really revivified your small town and made it look much better than the original version that it otherwise would be, right? Okay, so before I continue with this, right, I wanted to cover an important thing about imagery, all right? So, well, really just like creative writing in the UC PIQs in general. So, I actually wanted to make a separate video regarding imagery, metaphors, and all that good stuff in the UC PIQs because it's actually really touchy. Uh, Roughly speaking, a lot of consultants online, and actually even the University of California themselves, have said in statements that they prefer less creative writing and more direct statements for personal insight question responses. The problem is that what's said doesn't seem to align with what happens in the real world. And that's because, disclaimer, this is from my own experience, working with countless UC applicants and interviewing a plethora of UCI and UCB students. Like, a lot of people who wrote straightforward essays were just rejected, right? Meanwhile, essays that took creative liberty were often accepted. So it's like, dude, what did the AOs want, right? Like, is it a matter of people saying they'll do something, but then really just meaning the opposite, right? Look, I think you, Mr. James Halpert, mentioned it best on Reddit. Here's what they say, right? I'm an OOS, that stands for out of state, sophomore at UCLA, and got into Cal, UC San Diego on a merit scholarship, and UC Santa Barbara. Most of my essays lean toward the creative side, and I'd say all of them had a hook, although I think what that is exactly is a little subjective. A few had dialogue, and all of them were multiple paragraphs. One of them kind of had an overarching metaphor, I think, but I'd have to reread it. Point being that while I believe these guidelines, which I am hearing for the first time, are probably important, from my own experience, I feel like you shouldn't stress too hard about them. If your writing is good, it's good. I don't know, maybe the rest of my application was just really strong, but I'd like to think, which is supposed to say think, my essays were decent as well. You know, it's like, yeah, dude, right? There's going to be utility in things like metaphor and simile and not just PIQ 7, but any PIQ in general, right? Sometimes you need the full extent of linguistic depth to describe what's actually happening, right? For instance, maybe your extracurricular helping the community by raising funds through a marathon was actually quite challenging, more so than you thought, right? And to really show how much effort you put into organizing this event, you had to God forbid, right? Make comparisons with phrases using the words like or as. It's like, dude, you're going to need some modicum of creative expression when describing things because that's just the nature of communication, right? They're not demanding that every word come out of your mouth sound like some robot, right? But yeah, I'll probably dedicate another video sometime in the future talking about this stuff in more depth. For now, it's time to just get to the next one, all right? So number 3, be super specific with details, especially when explaining how you helped the community from multiple angles. Okay, so I think one of the biggest mistakes students make with PIQ 7 is they don't actually get to the nitty gritty of their experiences. they don't really describe with specific details of what actually happened, such that when admissions officers actually read it, they can't really make out much of anything, right? Specifically, I recommend you get into deep details about how the work you did actually helped the community. Like, so maybe you raised funds through your fundraiser, but how did those funds actually come to serve the community? What does it go to, right? I mean, how does an admissions officer read this and understand the impact of your work from the inside out? If you're too vague, they won't see the full impact, right? Now, there's a second point to this, okay? You can get specific by looking at the impact of your experience from multiple angles. So I'm going to take the marathon fundraiser event again, right? How do you actually help the community? Well, you do raise funds, that's for sure, right? But you also end up building a network through this event. Everyone participating will see the cause you're fundraising for and could even bond over the same cause, right? They may be more likely to participate in future causes, or if they become part of the same group, they'll work together on other future causes with you. In other words, they're recurring donors, right? You see what we're doing here, right? Our impact has lateral movement. We don't just have to say what impact we had in and of itself. There's other softer impacts that we don't see, right? Such as nurturing continuing donors or even using the fundraising event as a place of networking and social connection as well. And oh, by the way, a bonus tip, right? Try to think laterally about what constitutes community. Um, okay, yeah, kind of funny because I guess the bonus tip is really just a more obvious line of logic that follows the previous point, considering we just talked about thinking laterally. But long story short, right? There's multiple dimensions of community beyond just your physical one. Seriously, right? Like, I think a lot of people answering PIQ 7 feel as if they need to be limited to like their city, their school, or their local area's ethnic background, right? But it's like, dude, like you're in the information era, right? There's so many communities beyond just what we had back in the days of like drinking water from the hose and like like white picket fences and lead poisoning, right? Like, in fact, you might belong to communities based on interest, even if all the members aren't there physically, right? Take people who are interested in gaming, right? If you're interested in gaming, you're in the gaming community. And one of the funny ways you can answer this that's actually super interesting is saying how you help the gaming community by trying to be civil and fun despite the toxicity in certain games you play, right? Like take League of Legends, you got like Valorant, right? Stuff like that. All that good stuff, right? But, being nice is such a small thing to ask for, right? So I can see how you guys might ask, like, wouldn't that be like a weak topic, right? Like, it doesn't really have the weight that it deserves, right? And, like, oh God, like, oh my God, you guys. Like, dude, being nice in games is actually super easy. Yeah, that's true, right? But, like, no one can do it, right? Isn't it so weird that all we really need to make the community a better place is to just be one node of kindness in a network of toxicity? And, like, we can't even do that, man, right? Like, it's like, Jesus Christ, you guys, right? You could even extend this principle across different communities. Like, oh God, right? Like take the fashion industry, right? What can someone in the fashion community do to make their ecosystem a better place? Well, maybe before trying to change the world, we can always try, like, knocking ourselves down a peg and not being catty. What with our haughty shame and cowardly pride, right? Like, like, man. Oh, and by the way, like, in case it wasn't implied enough before in the beginning, yeah, you can in fact have your PIQ 7 have a smaller impact than anything super big. You're not really required to land on the moon or anything. And please don't fabricate it being bigger than it really is either, right? Unless you're trying to be like a main character or something, right? Which I don't really endorse in any of your PIQs because you're just gonna look like a goober, okay? And honestly, don't even sweat it, man. Like, UC PIQ 7 has great potential. It can be a bit tough, but it can make a great essay too, Like, even just following these basic steps I laid out, it's going to put you leagues ahead of the rest of the goobers. But like, you know, yeah, if you need anything like college admission consulting and advising, or really just last minute UC PIQ essay help because, the deadline's really close, right? You guys can always feel free to reach out through my email in the description box below. I'll try to do the best I can to really help you guys out because, man, like, some of y'all goobers have really procrastinated and, I could feel it. So, yeah, but that's about it. All right. See ya.